Okay, hello guys, and now we're back. We're now in chapter 3 of obligations and contracts. So this is still part of obligations. We're now in chapter 3. I am attorney Matt Palu-ay, and let's proceed. I'll adjust my camera just for a bit. There we go. Um, Chapter 3, different kinds of obligations. This is from Article 1179 to Article 1230. So this is further subdivided into 6 sections. You have Section 1, pure and conditional obligation. Section 2, obligations with a period. Section 3, alternative obligations. Section 4, joint and solidary obligations. Section 5, divisible and indivisible obligations. And Section 6, obligations with a penal clause. Okay? So don't get intimidated. You think na mahaba ito. But it's actually easy to understand. Okay, so by the end of this chapter, you'd be able to at least have a fairly good idea of what these obligations are. All right, let's go to the next slide. Every obligations 1179. Every obligation whose performance does not depend upon a future or uncertain event or a past event unknown to the parties is demandable at once. Okay. Every obligation which contains a resolutory condition shall also be demandable without prejudice to the effects of the happening of the event. So, the first paragraph actually refers to a pure obligation. Okay, a pure obligation is one which is not subject to any condition and no specific date is mentioned for its fulfillment. So therefore, it's immediately demandable. Okay, so I will go back to the previous page and I will read it again. Every obligation whose performance does not depend on a future or uncertain event or a past event unknown to the parties is demandable at once. Okay? So, this is a pure obligation. So, ano ba yung ibig sabihin ng future or uncertain event or a past event unknown to the parties? Ang tawag mo dyan ay condition. Okay? So, if it does not depend on a condition or a future uncertain event or a past event unknown to the parties, that is demandable at once. That is a pure obligation. So, I'll go back here. What are the example, or can you give me an example of an obligation, a pure obligation? Well, D obliges himself to pay C 1,000 pesos. The obligation is immediately demandable because there is no condition and no date is mentioned for its fulfillment. So, since there is no condition and there is no date for its fulfillment, then it is immediately demandable. So, who has the right to demand here? That will be the creditor, or C the creditor. Kasi yung may pagkakautang sa kanya is D, the debtor. Okay? So, what is a conditional obligation? A conditional obligation is one whose consequences are subject in one way or another to a fulfillment or to the fulfillment of a condition. So the very important question is, this is probably a question that you will get asked in the exams, is what is a condition? A condition is a future and uncertain event. With the happening of this event, the obligation may arise or it may be extinguished. Okay? So again, tatandaan mo, pag tinanong ka kung ano yung condition, it is a future and uncertain event. It is an event which will happen in the future and hindi mo alam kung mangyayari ba to o hindi. Okay? So, kapag nangyari yung event na yon, or yung event which is yung condition na yon, an obligation may arise or an already existing obligation may be extinguished. So, what is a suspensive condition? So, a while ago we discussed conditions. Okay, so we discussed what a condition is. A condition is actually a future and uncertain event. Period. It's that simple. But there are two types of conditions. So you have the first one is suspensive condition, and the other one is suspensive and resolutory. Okay, the second one is a resolutory condition. So we go first here with a suspensive condition because this is the easiest to understand. Suspensive condition means the fulfillment of a condition will give rise to an obligation. Okay, so you have to think of it in dalawang bagay yan. Yung una, yung completion or fulfillment ng condition, and yung pangalawa, yung obligation. So those are two separate things. simply the happening of the condition will give rise to the obligation. So, dalawang aspeto yan, which is yung fulfillment ng condition, and pangalawa, yung obligation itself, which is the obligation will arise or will be extinguished. So in this case, we are talking about suspensive conditions. So here, the obligation will arise. So perhaps I'll give you an example para mas maintindihan ninyo. I will sell you the land if it is given to me by my father's estate. Okay? So, well, may word dito which is estate. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this. Okay, so I'll explain it very briefly lang. If a person dies, all of his property goes to this imaginary swimming pool. I think I mentioned this. I mention this all the time, just to simplify. And this imaginary swimming pool, this is where all the assets of the person who died goes to. Okay, so all the cars, the lands, the jewelries, the buildings, or whatever else he owns, it goes to this swimming pool. It is collated there. Okay, sinusuma total yan. That is what you call the estate. Okay, dyan sa estate na yan, i-divide yan sa mga heirs, sa mga anak, sa asawa. Okay, so ang sinasabi niya dito, kapag yung lupa na yan ay maibigayan sa akin ng aking tatay dun sa kanyang estate after niya mamatay, ibibenta ko yan sa'yo. Okay? Pero kung hindi yan maibigay sa akin, hindi wala akong obligasyon na ibenta sa'yo. So as you can see, there are two things that happen here. The first one is the condition. If the land is given to me, that is the condition. It is a future and uncertain event. Now, if that happens, an obligation will arise. And what is that obligation? I will sell you that said parcel of land. Okay? I'll give you another example. I will sell you this cell phone if you can do 500 push-ups. Oh, this one's easier. So, the condition is you must do 500 push-ups. Okay? After you have done 500 push-ups, that is the condition. It is a future and uncertain event kasi hindi naman tayo sigurado kung magagawa mo ba yung 500 push-ups di ba? Pero kapag nagawa mo na ngayon, matitrigger na or yung aking obligasyon or the obligation will arise. Okay? Your fulfillment of the condition, which is the completion of the 500 push-ups, will give rise to an obligation. And that obligation is for me to sell you the cell phone. Okay? Simple pa naman, di ba? Let's proceed. Ito naman, resolutory condition. This means that there is already the fulfillment of a condition will extinguish an obligation which is already existing. So again, you look at it into two parts. The first one is that there is already an existing obligation. And the second one is the fulfillment of the condition. And ngayon, kapag nangyari yung condition na yon, yung existing mong obligation, mai-extinguish yan or maka-cancel out. Okay, example. Debtor will pay the creditor 6,000 pesos every month until the creditor graduates from college. So, actually, yung ganyan, yung debtor na yan is, you can consider him as the benefactor. Okay? So, may nagpapaaral dun kay creditor. So, yan yung kino-contemplate ng scenario na yan para maintindihan ninyo. Sabihin natin si debtor ay isang mayaman na tao. Tapos pinapaaral niya si creditor, yung kanyang scholar. At ang obligasyon niya kay creditor is bibigyan niya parati ng 6,000 pesos as allowance ito si creditor every month until yung creditor na-graduate na from college. So, ngayon, ano yung condition dito? Ano yung future and uncertain event? Ang sagot is if creditor graduates from college. Ngayon, kapag nag-graduate na siya from college, yung already existing obligation ni debtor ay ma-extinguish. O, ganun lang kasimple, guys. Okay? O, next slide na tayo. 1180. When the debtor binds himself to pay when his means permit him to do so, this obligation shall be deemed to be one with a period, subject to the provisions of Article 1197. Okay, o ano ba yung with a period naman yan? Okay, ang period ay isang future and certain event. Ibig sabihin, siguradong mangyayari. Ito ay pinagkaiba. Ang pinagkaiba niya is sa condition, is yung condition uncertain. Pero pareho silang mangyayari in the future. Again, kapag condition, it's future and uncertain event. Kapag period, it is future, but it is certain to happen. Okay? So, ano ba yung example ng mga event sa future na talagang mangyayari kahit anong gawin mo? Well, number one is yung death of a person. Okay? Lahat naman tayo mamamatay eh. So, maybe it's morbid, but it is something which is certain to happen. Sabi nga nung saying, there are two things that are permanent, and that is death, and the other one is taxes. So, kung ganon, di pwede mo nang ilagay dito, period, payment of taxes. Okay? Usually, binabayaran mo yan sa, sa tax season. I think that is on May or April. Okay, again, the happening of a period will either give rise or extinguish an obligation. If it will give rise to an obligation, it is called a suspensive period. If it will extinguish an already existing obligation, then that's what you call a resolutory period. Okay? So, again, ang condition ay future and uncertain event, divided yan into two. You have your suspensive condition and resolutory condition. On the other hand, ang period naman ay isang future and certain or event or siguradong mangyayari. That too is also divided into two, which is yung suspensive period and resolutory period. So, when the clause says, the debtor promises to pay when his means permit him to do so, is that valid? Apparently, it is. Kasi kapag tinagalog mo yan, babayaran kita. Kapag umokay-okay na ako. Valid pala yun. Okay? According to article, according to this article. And however, the rule in Article 1197 will apply. Ano ba yung 1197 na yan? Well, the second paragraph of 1197 says, the courts shall also fix the duration of the period when it depends upon the will of the debtor. The court shall determine as such period as may under the circumstances have been probably contemplated by the parties. Okay. So, I think ang kino-contemplate na scenario niyan is, sabi nung debtor, babayaran kita kapag ang means ko permits me to do so, o kapag nakaluwag-luwag na ako. O sabihin natin 5 taon na, hindi pa rin siya nakaluwag-luwag, pero may trabaho na siya at may pera na. Diba? Kung ganyan, pwede mo na siyang idemanda. Tapos, the courts will fix the duration of the period. O, bakit ko naman inassume na kailangan ko magdemanda? Ang sagot, nakalagay dito, the courts will fix the duration. Paano naman i-fix ng court yung duration kung hindi mo sinampa yung kaso sa korte? Diba? So, in reality, medyo hassle ito. Kasi again, you have to go through the process of filing a case. Litigation na naman yan. Bakit siya hassle? Kukuha ka ng lawyer diba? Babayad ka ng attorney's fees. May filing fee ka pa, 'di ba? May pleading fee, may appearance fee, 'di ba? Gagastos ka talaga para lang ma-fix yung payment. Kaya kung maaari, kung ikaw yung nagpapautang, iwasan mo 'yan. Kung ikaw naman ang umuutang, mas maganda kung parating ganyan yung terms and conditions ninyo. Okay. In conditional 1181, in conditional obligations, the acquisition of rights as well as the extinguishment of loss of those already acquired shall depend upon the happening of the event which constitutes the condition. Acquisition of rights pertain to suspensive condition. Surrender of the sweepstakes ticket to claim the prize. Loss of rights already acquired shall pertain to resolutory condition. X binds himself to support Y until Y graduates from college. Here, Y has already a right to receive support from X. However, upon the happening of the condition, which is that he will graduate from college, the obligation shall be extinguished. When the fulfillment of a condition depends upon the sole will of the debtor, the condition shall be void. If it depends upon chance or the will of the third person, the obligation shall take effect in conformity with the provisions of this code. So, ang tawag dito kapag it depends upon the sole will of one of the contracting parties. It's called a potestative condition. O, tandaan nyo yan ha, tinatanong yan parate. So, does a potestative condition, a potestative condition may have two possibilities. The first one is it depends on the will of the debtor. Here, only the condition is void. In this case, the conditional obligation is void. Example, I will pay you if I want. Okay, if I want, that is based merely on the sole will of the debtor. So dito, yung conditional obligation lang is void, yung if I want lang. So ibig sabihin yung I will pay you, magiging valid yan. So pwedeng demandable at once yan. Depends on the will of the creditor. Here, it is valid. So, ang sabi dito, I will pay you upon your demand. So sabi ng debtor, babayaran kita kapag siningil mo na ako. Well, actually, hindi niya naman na kailangan stipulate yan na kung siningil kasi under the law. No demand, no delay. Kaya sisingil talaga yung creditor. Okay, wait. What about the clause, I will pay you when my means permit me to do so? Is this considered a potestative condition depending upon the will of the debtor? Hence, it is void. Okay, the answer is no. Article 1180 expressly says that it is to be considered as an obligation with a period. I guess because the law presupposes na gaganda at gaganda din ang kalagayan mo sa buhay. Kaya sinabi niyang considered ito as a period. Kumbaga, it is future and certain na gaganda ang iyong takbo ng buhay. Okay? Kasi period future and certain, di ba? So, ina-assume ng courts na gaganda din, magkakapera ka at gaganda din ang estado mo sa buhay. Reading it alongside with Article 1197 second paragraph, it says that the court will fix a period. In this case, the debtor's will is not whether he should pay or not, since he is already bound himself to pay. What is left only to his will is the duration of the period. Okay, so ang issue dyan is hindi naman whether or not babayaran ng debtor yung kanyang pagkakautang. Babayaran niya talaga. Ang tanong lang is kailan. Kaya yung court yung mag-fix ng time kapag nagkaroon ng kasuhan. What is a casual condition? Here, the suspensive condition depends upon chance or upon the will of a third person. So, ang example, I will sell you my land if I win the case in the Supreme Court. So, dito, depends upon the will of a third person ito. Kasi, ang third person dito ay ang Supreme Court. Okay? What is a mixed condition? The suspensive condition depends partly upon chance and partly upon the will of a third person. Example, X, a building contractor, obliges himself to repair Y's building. So, si Y yung owner ng building after an earthquake. Okay, ulitin ko ha. Si X, inuobliga niya ang sarili niya na aayusin niya yung building ni Y pagkatapos ng lindol kapag nakitaan ng mga arbitrator o yan yung mga naghuhusga, sila yung nag-observe kung ano ba talagang nangyayari, that the construction defect has contributed in any way to the damage. In Tagalog, halimbawa, nagkaroon ng damage yung building ni Y. So ngayon, nagdemanda ngayon si Y kay X o kaya nagpadala lang ng demand letter. Sabi ni Y, Mr. X, bayaran mo ako ng damages kasi defective yung building mo. Okay? Ang sagot naman ni X, ganito. At sumagot siya ng using a mixed condition. Uobligahin ko ang sarili ko na aayusin ko yung building mo kapag nalaman o may findings na yung mga arbitrators na talagang defective yung pagkagawa ko ng building at dahil doon at nagka-earthquake dahil doon sa defectiveness ng aking or dahil sa defect ng aking pagkagawa sa building and dahil sa earthquake nag-contribute yung defect ng pagkagawa ko sa damage. So doon lang mag-a-arise yung kanyang obligation kapag nagkaroon ng finding yung arbitrator and yung partly upon chance dyan, yung earthquake. O pagkatapos ng earthquake at kapag sinabi ng arbitrator na may liability talaga ako. So, dalawa. So, here, the two conditions that need to take place is that the earthquake happened. So, upon chance. And number two, the decision of the panel of arbitrators. 1183. Impossible conditions are those contrary to good customs, public policy, and those prohibited by law shall annul the obligation which depends upon them. If the obligation is divisible, that part thereof which is not affected by the impossible or unlawful condition shall be valid. The condition not to do an impossible thing shall be considered as not having been agreed upon. So there are two types of impossible condition. The first one is physically impossible. I will pay you 10,000 pesos if it will not rain here in the Philippines for 1 year. So as you know, it is a fact that we are a tropical country. So it will always rain. So that's impossible. Number 2, I will pay you 1,000 pesos if you can carry 20 kavans of rice. So a kavan is equivalent to 75 liter. 1 liter is 75 1 liter is 1 kilogram. So 75 liters is essentially 75 kilograms. 20 kavans is 1,500 kilograms. 1 kilogram, actually ang layo ng math ko dito napaka-interesting na nilagay ko pa pala ito. Kapag I will pay you 10,000 pesos if you can lift 3,306 pounds of weight. Okay. So is that physically possible or impossible? Okay, to find the answer, nag-research ako. Ang nakalagay dito ay the Guinness Book of Records lists the feat of lifting at 2,840 kilograms in a back as the greatest weight ever raised by a human being. So technically, the Leon is wrong. Carrying 20 kavans of rice is actually physically possible if you are Paul Anderson, the weightlifter. Aba, very interesting. So what did we learn here? Well, apparently, you don't take everything as gospel truth. You have to, you can actually research. You can actually ask, and I actually want you to do that. You always have to be continuously asking and to be continuously curious, because that's the process and where you will learn and become a better person. Okay, next slide. Legally impossible. When this is when the conditions are contrary to law, morals, good custom, public order, policy. I will give you 10,000 pesos if you will kill X. So that's contrary to law. You agree to be the common law Y of X. That's contrary to moral. If you will slap your father, contrary to good custom. If you will publicly advocate and overthrow the government, contrary to public order. You will not appear as witness in a crime against X in a criminal case, contrary to public policy. Okay. The condition that some event happened at a determinate time shall extinguish the obligation as soon as the time expires, or if it has become indubitable that the event will not take place. X obliges himself to pay 10,000 pesos if B will marry C before B reaches the age of 23. So here, X is liable if B marries C before B reaches 23. X is not liable if B marries C after reaching 23 or above, or if B dies before reaching 23. The obligation is extinguished. Okay? So again, the condition that some event happen at a determinate time shall extinguish the obligation as soon as the time expires, or it has been indubitable or probably impossible that the event will not take place. Indubitable. It has become indubitable that the event will not take place, or kumbaga it has become established. There's no doubt. Indubitable. So hindi talaga mangyayari kasi nga namatay na si B. Okay, so mangyayari kasi dito si X magiging liable lang, nababayaran si B kapag si B, if B marries C bago mag 23. Nang nangyari bago mag 23 namatay na siya. So imposible talaga ma-fulfill tong condition na to kasi deads na si B. Okay, next slide. The condition that some event will not happen at a determinate time shall render the obligation effective from the moment the time indicated has elapsed, or it has become evident that the event cannot occur. If no time period has been fixed, the condition shall be deemed fulfilled at such time as may have probably been contemplated, bearing in mind the nature of the obligation. So this is a negative condition. If the event does not happen at a determinate time, the obligation shall be effective. So there's an example here. Si X, he binds himself to give B 10,000 pesos if B is not yet married before December 1, 2020. Meaning, magbabayad si X kay B ng 10K kapag December 21, December 1 is single pa din si B. So here, X is liable to B to give B 10,000 if B does not get married before December 1, 2020. Here, B is still single on December 1, 2020. X is not liable to give B if B marries on or before December 1, 2020. However, if B dies before December 1, 2020, the condition is effective because certainly B will not be able to marry since B is already dead. So this is a negative condition. The condition shall be deemed fulfilled when the obligor prevents its fulfillment. X agrees to give Y a commission of 5% if Y could sell the property for 1 million pesos. Okay, so sa real estate practice, may 5% commission usually kapag nakabenta ka ng property. Kaya medyo lucrative ang practice ng real estate. So how do I know that? Well, I am also a licensed real estate broker. I also passed the real estate examination. However, I was not able to, I think I was able to sell one property before and it was quite lucrative. But ang focus ko was eventually shifted to litigation, so I don't really do a lot of real estate. So, but I do know, I do have experience with that as I was able to transact before. So, X agreed to give Y 5% commission if Y could sell the property for 1 million pesos. So, si Y yung ahente. Si X ata yung yung may-ari ng property. So, Y found a buyer named B. So, and introduced him to X. So, ngayon, ang ginawa nito ni X na medyo may pagka fraudulent is ang ginawa niya, binenta niya na lang kay B yung property directly. Kumbaga, bypass niya si Y kasi ayaw niya magbayad ng 5% commission. In this case, X prevented the fulfillment of the condition, which is Y would sell the property. So, dapat si Y mismo yung magbebenta ng property, siya yung magpa-process ng sale Pero, etong si X, medyo magulang, ang ginawa niya, kinut off niya yung middleman. Gusto niya, siya na magbebenta doon kay X. Is that a smart thing to do? The answer is no, absolutely not. Kasi, yung paperwork mo dyan, kailangan may mag-asikaso din. So, might as well bigay mo na lang yung sa real estate broker. At the same time, yun naman ang usapan ninyo so you have to be true to your word, diba? Okay, in this case, X prevented the fulfillment of the condition, which is Y would sell the property. Hence, in this case, the condition shall be deemed fulfilled, and X must pay the 5% commission. Okay, 1187, the effects of a conditional obligation to give once condition has been fulfilled shall retroact to the day of the constitution of the obligation. Nevertheless, when the obligation imposes reciprocal prestations upon the parties, the fruits and interest during the pendency of the condition shall be deemed to have been mutually compensated. If the obligation is unilateral, the debtor shall appropriate the fruits and interest received unless, from the nature and circumstances of the obligation, it should be inferred that the intention of the person constituting the same was different. In obligations to do and not to do, the court shall determine in each case the retroactive effect of the condition that has been complied with. So, retroactive effects of fulfillment of suspensive condition. An obligation to give subject to a suspensive condition becomes demandable only upon the fulfillment of a condition. So, example, January 2020, CS agreed to sell his land to B if B loses a case involving another parcel of land. So, April 2020, CS sold his land to C, a third party. And then eventually, on December 2020, si B, he lost the case. Considering that B lost the case, si S may obligasyon na ibebenta niya dapat kay B as of January 2020 yung lupa. Hence, B actually has a better right than C over the said parcel of land. Kasi may retroactive effect yung fulfillment ng suspensive condition. Ano ba yung retroactive effect pala? Ang retroactive is pwede mong ibalik sa dating panahon. It has a retroactive effect. Ang effect niya, pwedeng ibalik mo siya. So dito, although binili na ni C, third party yung lupa, mas may better right si B kasi nga si B naman talaga dapat yung ibibentahan ng lupa di ba? 1188, creditor may before the fulfillment of the condition bring the appropriate action for the preservation of his right. The debtor may recover what during the same time he has paid by mistake in case of suspensive condition. 1189, when the condition have been imposed with the intention of suspending the efficacy of an obligation to give, the following rules shall be observed in case of the improvement, loss, or deterioration of the thing during the pendency of the condition. If the thing is lost without the fault of the debtor, the obligation shall be extinguished. If the thing is lost through the fault of the debtor, he shall be obliged to pay the damages. It is understood that the thing is lost when it perishes or goes out of commerce or disappears in such a way that its existence is unknown or cannot be recovered. Number 3, when the thing deteriorates without the fault of the debtor, the impairment is to be borne by the creditor. Number 4, if it deteriorates through the fault of the debtor, the creditor may choose between the rescission of the obligation and its fulfillment with indemnity for damages in either case. Okay, ano ba yung tinutukoy nito? When the conditions have been imposed with the intention of suspending efficacy of the obligation to give, the following rules shall be observed. This talks about improvement, loss, or deterioration during the pendency, habang inaantay nyo yung kung mangyayari ba talaga yung condition o hindi. Number 5, if the thing is improved by its nature or by time, the improvement shall inure to the benefit of the creditor. If it is improved at the expense of the debtor, he shall have no other right than those granted to the usufructuary. Okay, 1190. When the conditions have for their purpose the extinguishment of an obligation to give, the parties upon the fulfillment of said conditions shall return to each other what they have received. In case of loss, deterioration, or improvement of the thing, the provisions with respect to the debtor are laid down in the preceding article shall be applied to the party who is bound to return. As for obligations to do and not to do, the provisions of the second paragraph of 1187 shall be observed as regards the effect of the extinguishment of obligation. 1191, the power to rescind obligations is implied in reciprocal ones in case of the obligor. In case one of the obligors should not comply with what is incumbent upon him, the injured party may choose between fulfillment, yan yung specific performance, and rescission of the obligation with payment of damages in either case. He may also seek rescission even after he has chosen fulfillment if the latter should become impossible. So, kung ang options mo kasi dito is alternative pwede kang humingi ng specific performance o itutuloy mo yung obligasyon dun sa kontrata or ika-cancel mo na lang. Pero you can just choose one. Pero kapag halimbawa pinili mo yung fulfillment pero imposible na siyang mangyari, pwede mong i-rescind na lang. Okay? The court shall decree the rescission claimed unless there be just cause authorizing the fixing of a period. This is understood to be without prejudice to the rights of third persons who have acquired things in accordance with Articles 1385 and 1388 and the mortgage law. So, remedies in reciprocal obligation. So, very, very simple. And then, you always have to remember this one hand because this is very, very important. Actions for specific performance, meaning you compel the debtor to comply with his obligation, or action for rescission, meaning you simply cancel the obligation. In both cases, you may ask for damages. So, the remedies are alternative, meaning you can only ask for one. Pero may dadagdag ako dyan. However, kapag humingi ka ng specific performance, pero yung specific performance, imposible nang mangyari, pwede kang mag-opt o lumipat ka sa rescission. In case both parties have committed a breach of obligation, the liability of the first infractor shall be equitably tempered by the courts. If it cannot be determined which of the parties first violated the contract, the same shall be deemed extinguished, and each shall bear his own damages. Okay, Well, that's probably it for the first subsection on pure and conditional obligations. So, in actuality, ito yung may pinakamahaba. At least we are able to finish the long part. So, yung succeeding obligations, medyo mabilis na lang yan. Okay, so with that, I will end this lecture. Thank you.